It was supposed to be just another Sunday afternoon, a routine match, the kind that people casually watched while munching on snacks or chatting with friends, except this time, something felt different. The air buzzed in a way that no one could quite explain, as if the atmosphere itself was charged with an electric tension, the kind you feel before a storm, but without the rain. In the stands, the crowd was alive with the usual hum of anticipation, yet beneath the surface, something was beginning to shift. Elena, a lifelong football fan and self-proclaimed skeptic of the strange, sat with her best friend, Marco, both too engrossed in the game to notice the subtle warping of reality around them, at least at first. It started with a flicker, a brief stutter in the lights, but it was so imperceptible that most didn't notice. Then Messi, that figure who seemed to transcend the game itself, received the ball at the edge of the box, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Elena, with her sharp observational instincts, caught the moment just before he struck the ball. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something beyond mere focus, as though he could see the trajectory of the universe itself, as if he knew the weight of this moment. The crowd inhaled in unison, and then as Messi unleashed the shot, it was as though time itself folded. The ball sped toward the goal at a velocity that defied physics, curving in ways that were impossible, bending the very laws of the game. The net bulged as if in slow motion, but it wasn't just the ball that seemed to defy reality. Elena's surroundings began to fracture. The pitch warped like a reflection in a broken mirror, and the roar of the crowd became muffled, then distorted into something alien, as though they were hearing it from the other side of a veil. Her heart hammered in her chest, a primal fear gripping her. This wasn't just a goal. This was something else. Marco, who had always dismissed Elena's fascination with the impossible, now sat frozen, his mouth slightly agape, unable to comprehend the growing dissonance in the air. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a dawning realization. The fabric of reality itself had been altered. Elena could feel the pulse of this new reality pressing down on her like a weight, and yet, she couldn't pull herself away from it. The once familiar stadium now seemed like a distorted dreamscape. Buildings wavered like heat haze, the sky flickered in unnatural hues, and every step they took seemed to echo with a strange resonance that sent chills down their spines. The world was on the verge of unraveling, but neither of them knew why. The people around them continued as if unaware of the collapse of the world's logical boundaries, some still cheering, others looking at their phones, oblivious to the growing rift in the space they inhabited. Elena's hands trembled as she reached out for Marco, but when her fingers brushed against him, there was a strange pull, like they were no longer entirely connected. Was she still in her body? Was he? The question was maddening, a constant echo in her mind. Marco, sensing her discomfort, glanced around, his usual sarcasm fading. "Elena, what the hell is happening?" he asked, his voice low, a mixture of awe and terror. The world felt like it was breathing, and the rhythm was far from natural. For a brief moment, Elena could have sworn she saw the sky tear open, just for a second, before the cracks were smoothed over, as if the very structure of reality was being patched together with invisible thread. But it was the goal that had triggered it, that single moment of Messi's brilliance, a goal so perfect that it wasn't just a piece of sports history, it was the keystone of something far more complex, something beyond their understanding. Elena felt a growing pit in her stomach. This wasn't just a match anymore. It was an event that had rewritten the very rules of existence, and no one, not even Messi himself, seemed to know why or how. The true scale of what had just happened was unfolding in real time, but the answers, if they even existed, were nowhere to be found. As Elena and Marco exchanged uneasy glances, they both felt it. The weight of something monumental had shifted, and they were now trapped in its wake, unsure of where this new reality would take them, or if they even had a choice in the matter. As the chaos of the moment slowly began to settle, and the world around them seemed to resettle into a warped, yet familiar, rhythm, Elena and Marco stood frozen in the center of the pitch, their minds scrambling to comprehend what had just unfolded. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, the usual bustle of the crowd no longer providing comfort, but rather an eerie reminder of how far removed they were from the world they had known just moments ago. They had a choice now: stay, try to make sense of the fragmented reality they found themselves in, or walk away, pretending this was all some bizarre hallucination. But Elena knew in her gut it wasn't a dream. This was real. The gravity of what had just occurred weighed heavily on her, gnawing at her as she looked around, almost instinctively searching for an answer in the fractured landscape. Marco, on the other hand, was more practical. His usual cool-headed, skeptical nature clashed with the overwhelming sense of unease that seemed to suffuse the world now. "We need to get out of here," he muttered, his voice strained, yet not quite fully convinced of the danger. But Elena wasn't ready to flee. She needed to understand this, to confront it head-on. "No," she replied quietly, her voice steady but filled with a resolve that surprised even her. "We have to find out what's really happening. What that goal did." And so, with their hearts heavy and the world around them flickering in odd, unpredictable waves, they began to move. They walked through the stadium, but nothing felt right. The walls seemed to bend, the lights flickered. Again, and people passed them by without acknowledging the strangeness that had settled in the air like a thick fog. It was as if time itself had fractured, and they were left walking in its cracks. Marco's initial skepticism began to turn to doubt, and with every strange turn they took, every distortion in the environment, every impossible object or moment of surrealism, they felt further and further from reality. It was then that they encountered their first obstacle, a group of figures, shadowy and indistinct, standing just outside the exit gates. At first, they looked like nothing more than bystanders, but Elena could feel something in their presence, a danger lurking beneath their stillness. The figures didn't move or speak, but Elena felt their eyes on her, cold and calculating, as if they knew what had happened and were watching to see what she would do. They weren't just regular people, she realized. They were part of something larger, something that understood the power Messi had unleashed. Marco instinctively stepped closer to her, his earlier bravado giving way to wariness. "Do you think they know what's going on?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena nodded but didn't respond, her mind racing. She had no idea how these figures fit into all of this, but she knew they were dangerous. As they cautiously sidestepped the shadowy group, it became clear that whatever had changed in the world wasn't just affecting them, it was affecting everything. Each step they took through the world seemed to stir something, an unseen force, a ripple in the fabric of the simulation. They began to notice odd things, random objects floating in midair, people repeating the same phrase over and over like a broken record, and places that shouldn't exist appearing out of thin air. But what shook Elena the most was how their perception of the world itself had started to warp. The longer they spent in this reality, the more they felt disconnected from their own bodies, as though the very act of questioning the world around them made it more unstable, more susceptible to whatever strange force had been unleashed by that goal. They reached a small alley, away from the chaos of the stadium, and Elena felt something shift, a whisper in the air, like the world itself was speaking to her. A figure emerged from the shadows, an older man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, dressed in a way that felt out of place in this broken world. "You're not the first to come looking for answers," he said, his voice low but filled with a strange authority. "But you're far too late to undo what's been done." The words struck Elena like a punch to the gut. Who was this man? Was he an ally, or another obstacle? Marco, ever the skeptic, narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. The man smiled faintly, almost knowingly, as though he'd been waiting for them to find him. "Messi's goal did more than break the game," he said, eyes gleaming with the weight of some ancient knowledge. "It broke reality itself. And now, it's only a matter of time before everything unravels completely. But you can still find a way to stabilize it, or make it worse." The weight of his words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Elena's mind raced. How could one goal, one moment in time, have this kind of power? What did he mean by stabilizing or worsening it? The man's cryptic warnings only deepened the mystery, and the tension between the three of them grew. Elena wanted answers, but Marco, ever the realist, couldn't shake the overwhelming fear that perhaps this wasn't something to understand. Perhaps it was something to escape. But Elena was already making up her mind. She would keep going, no matter how dangerous, no matter how much her instincts screamed at her to turn back. This was bigger than football. This was a break in reality itself. And she would find out what had caused it, even if it meant risking everything. The questions multiplied with each step they took forward, and the danger that loomed over them grew heavier. Every answer brought more uncertainty, and every discovery seemed to unravel the very fabric of their understanding. They were no longer sure if they were the ones seeking the truth, or if they had become pawns in a much larger game, one with consequences that extended far beyond the confines of the football pitch. The air was thick with tension as Elena, Marco, and the mysterious man stood at the edge of the crumbling reality they had been thrust into. The world around them hummed with an eerie energy, the ground beneath their feet feeling unstable, as if it could split apart at any moment. The final confrontation loomed, its weight pressing down on them with a force that was both overwhelming and suffocating. They had come too far to turn back now. The man who had revealed the truth of what Messi's goal had done, how it had shattered the very essence of the world, was now their only guide through the storm that was about to break. He had given them only fragments of information, cryptic clues that spoke of a dark force that had been lurking in the shadows, feeding off the disruption of the simulation. This force, this entity, was not bound by the same laws of reality that they were. It had no form, no face, but it was everywhere, like a virus in the system, distorting and twisting everything in its path. Elena, her mind racing with the gravity of what was at stake, turned to Marco, her voice steady but tinged with the anxiety of the moment. "We've got one shot at this. We need to destroy the source of the corruption, whatever it is." "The man?" He said, "We can't fix reality. We can only stop it from falling apart completely." Marco nodded, but his eyes were distant, as if he were preparing himself for the worst. "I still don't know what we're up against. But we've got no choice now. We either stop it or let it take everything. We don't have time to be afraid." Elena took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her: fear, determination, doubt. She knew what had to be done, but the weight of the task was unbearable. She turned to the mysterious man, who had been silent for the past few moments, and asked, "What's the weakness? What do we need to destroy?" The man's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Elena saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. "It's not about destroying it. It's about breaking its hold. The entity feeds on chaos, on the instability Messi's goal caused. You have to find its anchor, its tether to this reality, and sever it. Only then can the world be set back on its proper course." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Elena and Marco exchanged a look, their resolve strengthening despite the uncertainty that clouded their minds. They didn't know what this entity was or how it had gained so much power, but they understood that it was feeding off the very things they had fought against: fear, confusion, dissonance. The final plan was simple. They needed to reach the center of the broken reality, where the entity's influence was strongest. There, they would have to confront it not with brute force, but with understanding, with clarity, the very things the entity thrived on suppressing. The realization hit them both at once. Their greatest weapon in this battle was not strength, but unity. If they could stay focused, keep their minds sharp, and remember the truth of who they were, they could sever the entity's grip on their world. Elena stood tall, gathering every ounce of courage she had, every bit of hope that remained in the face of this impossible task. Marco, usually the skeptic, now stood beside her with a quiet determination that surprised them both. "Let's do this," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than they ever had before. They didn't speak much more. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them was filled with the understanding that this was their final chance. They knew the entity wouldn't go down easily. It had woven itself into the very fabric of the simulation, and every step closer to the heart of its power would be met with resistance, with twisting distortions in the world around them, pulling at their minds, trying to break their resolve. Elena felt a cold chill run down her spine as she pictured the horrors they would face: shifting landscapes, impossible choices, the fabric of reality itself bending and cracking under the strain. But they were ready. They had to be. The time for hesitation was over. With the final decision made, they began to move toward the heart of the storm, the ground beneath them trembling with every step, as if the world itself was aware that the endgame had begun. Each step felt heavier, each breath more labored, But they pressed on, knowing that whatever came next would either save them or consume them entirely. The calm before the storm was gone. The storm was here, and all they could do was face it head-on. The world had fractured beyond recognition as Elena and Marco made their way to the epicenter of the corruption, the place where reality itself hung by a thread. The once familiar landscapes twisted and writhed like a living organism, each step they took bringing them deeper into the entity's domain. The ground underfoot felt as though it were pulsing with malevolent energy, and the sky above them flickered, shifting between impossible colors and patterns. The oppressive weight of the unknown bore down on them, and every inch of progress seemed to cost them more, as though the very fabric of existence was resisting their presence. As they reached the heart of the corruption, the world around them seemed to collapse into a single, chaotic swirl of shifting images and distorted sounds, an all-encompassing void that threatened to swallow them whole. In the center of it all stood the entity, its form indescribable, a void filled with shifting shadows and light, an abstraction that transcended everything they had known. It did not speak, but its presence was suffocating, an overwhelming force that had taken root in the cracks of reality, feeding off the uncertainty, the fear, the chaos. Elena could feel her mind beginning to unravel under its influence, the whispers of doubt gnawing at her resolve. Marco's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but he stood firm, his grip tightening around the strange, ancient artifact the mysterious man had given them. It was the key, the weapon, the only chance they had to sever the entity's hold on their world. But as they stepped closer, the entity lashed out, distorting their perceptions, warping their sense of time and space, creating hallucinations of people they had lost, of failures they had never escaped. It was as if the entity knew their deepest fears and was using them as weapons against their will. Elena felt herself breaking, her emotions stretched to their breaking point, but just as the entity's pressure seemed unbearable, a flash of clarity hit her. She realized it wasn't just the artifact that would defeat the entity, it was their ability to face the darkness within themselves, the courage to confront the fear that had haunted them all along. In that moment, Elena let go of everything, the doubts, the fear, the guilt, and with an overwhelming surge of emotion, she reached out and activated the artifact. The world trembled, and for a heartbeat, everything went still. The entity screamed, its form shifting violently, as if it were being torn apart from the inside out. The force of the artifact's power was immense, but it required sacrifice. Elena could feel herself slipping away, her connection to the world fading as the artifact's energy consumed her, but she held on, focusing on the clarity she had found. Marco, his face twisted with anguish, tried to reach out to her, but he was too late. In a final, desperate act, he too reached for the artifact, pulling the energy toward him, the immense pressure nearly crushing them both. Together, they channeled everything they had, every ounce of will, every shred of strength, into the artifact, and with a final, resounding crack, the entity shattered. The world around them seemed to collapse and then, just as suddenly, it was over. The landscape returned to normal, the chaos subsided, and silence reigned. But the silence was heavy, pregnant with the weight of their sacrifice. Elena collapsed to her knees, drained, her mind and body broken from the toll of the battle, and Marco, equally exhausted, sank beside her. They had won, but the cost was steep. The entity was gone, but at what price? As they stood together, feeling the weight of their loss and their victory, they realized that nothing would ever be the same. The world was saved, but it had been forever changed by their actions. They were different now, too, scarred, but stronger, bound together by a shared experience that had tested the very limits of their endurance. Elena knew that life would never be simple again. The world was no longer the same, and neither were they. Their choices had altered the course of reality, leaving them with a burden neither of them fully understood. They had saved the world, but they had also left behind a trail of questions, mysteries, and consequences that would echo for years to come. As they walked away from the epicenter, the landscape around them seemed almost too real, too solid, a reminder of the fragile balance between creation and destruction. The journey had ended, but the scars would last forever. And as they disappeared into the distance, the world seemed to breathe, a little more uncertain, a little more fragile, but alive. Elena's thoughts turned to the future, how they would rebuild, how they would face the world they had shaped. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they had chosen to face the darkness, and in doing so, they had become something more than mere survivors. They had become the architects of their own fate, and with that power, they would shape the future, no matter what challenges lay ahead. And as the last vestiges of the entity faded into memory, Elena couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope amidst the uncertainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And so, the story closed on a new beginning, one where the past and future merged into an endless horizon of possibility. Thanks for reading, and don't forget to subscribe for more.